So welcome everybody to this webinar where we're really looking at the Blueprint 2, and it's a 101 guide really, designed for those who are coming along to the TinTech London Market event to give you the foundational knowledge in order to take part in the discussions next week. But we're hoping that it'll be of interest for those that are new to the subject or just want to have a recap on what Blueprint 2 Phase 1 is all about, some of the fundamentals around how it may impact your organization, and also to leave you with perhaps a few questions you might like to put towards your organization, your management team, in order to get the ball moving and make sure that you're ready for when Blueprint 2 comes down the road. So joining me today are Tim Pledger, who's e-admin lead for the UK at Swiss Re, and Greg Brown, partner at Oxbow Partners, who heads up the London market there, but also an expert in the field. So great to have you along, chaps. As I explained, we're looking at kind of the Blueprint 1 Phase 1, and perhaps Tim, I could come to you first and just give us a brief intro to what that project, what that initiative is really trying to achieve for the market.
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure many of the people attending this session will recognise that the current solutions are very old and rather creaky now. We get quite a few incidents taking place generally. So there is a real need to update the central infrastructure, and that basically is what Phase 1 is all about. It's replacing all of the major applications that Analytic will use internally, but also involves obviously the connectivity for all of the brokers and carriers that we have. Ultimately, as we move to all those new applications, it's going to mean refreshing the messages that we use slightly. There's a range of EDI messaging used that most of which will be supported going forwards, but there are some unsupported messages which will impact various market participants. And then all of the details that are held, the central databases, all the things about the party users and the bank accounts, stamp details, etc., all of those will need to be refreshed.
Right. And Greg, anything to add about kind of the strategic ambition of the project?
Well, just a bit of background, and probably a lot of people listening will be aware, but this is an iteration of an original program set up by Lloyd's in 2019, originally titled Future at Lloyd's. But actually over the years, it has been refined and, exactly as Tim describes, been focused much more on infrastructure as a Phase 1. It went over various iterations of various blueprints and landed on Blueprint 2, which is where we are today with the phases of work. Phase 1 due to launch currently at some point this year.
Right. And we're going to kind of cover off some kind of foundational fundamentals around Phase 1 with a view to looking at Phase 2 at the event that's coming up. And I kind of wanted to start with EDI messaging. Tim, do you want to just tell us what that means and the role of Accord in perhaps replacing those messages?
Sure. So obviously the central service has been around for many years, and the natural messaging to use at the time was the EDIFACT messages, EDI, and there's a whole raft of messages currently used. Many of us have been used to the acronyms on BSMs and USMs, CSMs, SCMs, D signs, etc., WSETs. All of those are message exchanges that take place for different activities. But one of the problems that the central services have is that there are so many different versions of all of those. Currently, there's something around in the region of 130 versions of those messages supported, which they're looking to streamline going forwards. The interesting bit for Phase 2 is that ultimately, when we come to that, the messaging is going to change to the Accord GRLC messages. And within that, there are only 5 message types. So suddenly we'll go from 120, 30 odd supported messages down to just 5 that we're all going to be using.
Okay. Greg, anything to add on the messaging front?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we move to a more standardized way of doing things. The market has historically allowed for lots of kind of wrinkles and bespoke options. And I think actually, in order to allow the London market to be a truly global marketplace for insurance, aligning with something like an Accord standard, which is pretty globally and certainly US well recognized, it's just absolutely critical to allow us to be open for business.
Cool. So that brings me on to something else that may be familiar with people but may not, which is the core data record, the CDR. Perhaps you'd like to just give us an overview about what that is, a bit of an introduction, and perhaps what it means for organizations, both in terms of the technology that they might need to start thinking about, but also the capabilities and maybe the training as well that needs to go into that. Tim, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So the core data record is really a database storing contract information. So in our natural carrier side of things, the broker will have all the details about the contract in their systems. So when they send information directly to us as carriers, we also capture that information. Going forwards, then we can automate our processes because we've both got access to that contract information to validate what we're receiving. That's the one thing that currently is lacking in central services. They don't have that contract information. So whenever a transaction comes in, they need to manually look at the contract to validate that the information in the message is accurate. So going forwards, within the placing side, the intention will be that during the placement cycle, that data will be captured centrally, so that by the time the message flows for premiums and claims, then we'll be able to do the automated processing for central services. So as a premium submission, broker would submit that. All of the information in there will then be cross-checked against the core data record and should achieve a high level of validation. And then on the claims side, we can do some similar checks. So before providing the claims details to our technicians, the central service can do a number of checks and present the results to those technicians to hopefully streamline the process.
And Greg, there's some kind of issues and challenges around that. Firstly, around getting the data into kind of that where the roles and responsibilities for that, but also there's probably a technical capability that organizations will need to think about, kind of technology capability as well. What's your reading of it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm going to plug a report that we did with the LMA recently on enhanced underwriting, and we interviewed a big spread of the market, Lloyd's focused, obviously, and actually the number one issue people talked around was data, in terms of delivering new models and new ways of distributing products fundamentally and underwriting products. And the CDR at the heart of it is an attempt to move from, as Tim described, this siloed world where everyone is recreating their own data individually, which in a syndicated market, there's a lot of overlap in terms of data, and particularly with the value chain brokers through to reinsurers. And I think it's absolutely critical that we get this standardization of data, and the CDR is exactly trying to do that. But to your point, Jeremy, about some of the challenges, data is often described as an outside problem in terms of it's other people where the problem lies. It's the distribution partners or it's whatever it might be. And actually, I think fundamentally, if everyone is saying that, you've got to believe that everyone has issues. And I think this will go some way to help people rectifying that. But as you say, as you imply, there'll be a lot of internal work for carriers and brokers to do to get the kind of quality of data up. In our experience, we're seeing a lot of good work being done, and the quality of the data and data management has significantly increased in recent years.
Can I just add to that? So I think one of the challenges we face at the moment is that each of us as organisations captures the data independently, and we need to get the data is captured by the most appropriate source. The broker entered the initial piece, passes on that information, which carriers ingest. Carriers then do their pricing, pass that information back to the broker. They ingest it. Brokers then pass that on to the following carriers, so they're ingesting the same data. So ultimately, we need to get to a position where data is keyed once and used by all to reduce all of the queries. And hopefully, as part of the CDR piece and what's going on within the wider risk-reconnaissance placing environment, we'll get there.
Great. Another stakeholder in all of this is an organisation called Velanetic, and I think they're charged, and correct me if I'm wrong, with kind of delivering this kind of digital ecosystem that we've just been talking about. Greg, do you want to just give us a bit of background about Velinetic, kind of their role, what it's made up of, and where we are, I suppose?
Yep. I mean, it's very simple. Velinetic is a joint venture between the market and DXC. DXC is, I think we might have mentioned, provides that's the current central services infrastructure, and as a result of that JV, they will be then delivering the future central services infrastructure. They are currently focused on phase 1, which is, as Tim said, pretty much a straight replacement of the current infrastructure with some tidying up of messages, and then also moving into phase 2. It's worth noting that obviously John Neal, for those that you haven't been paying any attention, you'll notice John Neal has said he will be leaving his position as CEO of Lloyds, so the world will be changing. Phase 1 has to be delivered. Quite what that means for precisely the timing and nature of phase 2, if I was starting as CEO of Lloyds, I'd probably want to have a kind of think about what I do and where I do that. And as we will talk about I'm sure the value really comes from phase 2. So there's no doubt we need to do some form of phase 2, but the original kind of sense that there'll be a phase 1 and then fairly shortly after a phase 2, that world I'm sure will change.
Yeah. And Tim, I'll bring you in. So it's not just on the placing side. This is also on the claim side that Velinetic are building the solutions for this phase 1.
Yeah, so the Velinetic services are more on the accounting side, so premium and claims piece don't really get involved at the moment on placing activities. The core data record piece will be the first interactions there. So yeah, very much involved in premiums, claims, and in the actual movement of money. Central settlement facility, which is really their crown jewel, which allows money to be moved between multiple parties on the same day.
Okay, so there's a couple of other areas that I just wanted to cover off for those who may not be familiar. And that the first one is how queries are handled and how that might change, and then the second one is kind of the replacement of email delivery. So perhaps Tim, we'll start with the first one. What are some of the changes that people need to be aware of in kind of query handling?
Well, in today's environment, everything is submitted by the broker, so all channels lead to them. The carriers, what are the services on behalf of us as carriers, we get output at the end of all of those activities. So any queries that get raised on the premium side, Velinetic technicians have to raise those queries directly with a broker, regardless of whether it's a broker issue or something that naturally would be with the carrier. So Velinetic may know that it's a carrier problem. They don't go direct, they'll pass it off to the broker. When we get on to phase 2, it will start off with that same process just to allow some bedding in period. But ultimately, Velinetic will then be empowered to approach carriers directly, and we'll have facilities where we can access those queries or get messages on those queries and resolve them directly. So hopefully it will go some way to speeding up some of that query process.
So Greg, organisations need to be aware these changes are afoot, both in terms of communications and responding to them. I guess that's what people need.
Yeah, and actually most clients that we talk to that need to be aware are pretty well aware. I mean, the journey. It's been a bumpy journey, I think. These could be said about that, but I think a lot of people are now very much on the bus. There's obviously frustrations on timing, but I think everyone is lined up in the way that they need to be lined up. I think the key thing is now we just need to get it over the line, frankly.
Yeah. So final thing I just mentioned there, Tim, was the kind of the delivery of the reports and the changes from email. Do you want to just give a quick summary on that, please?
Sure. So a lot of the reports and things that we receive from central services come via email at the moment. So obviously a push, we just receive them into our inboxes, and many of us have got some automated routines off the back of that. When it comes to the new services, rather than reports going out via email, which is a bit less secure, there'll be a ClickSense product where we'll be able to go and retrieve them. So it'll be moving from a push reports out to we go and collect them. So there's going to be some fundamental changes there. Obviously impacts the workflow that many of us will have to need to get them before we can actually initiate that workflow.
Yeah. And I think that's the point, isn't it, Greg? A lot of these things are not moving the dial too much in terms of the kind of our traditional approach to this. It's just putting a digital kind of front end and changing, as Tim was saying, the kind of the workflows that people do on a day-to-day basis. Is that correct? Or
I think I see it slightly differently. So in terms of actually a lot of what is being done in Blueprint 2, there are other initiatives out there, but in Blueprint 2 is very much about the back end stuff and about the back end infrastructure. But where you're absolutely right is that is the starting point as an enabler to allow a digital marketplace and the transfer of data. And one thing we haven't talked about is the kind of digital first versus document first approach. The market has historically been very document driven and building systems around documents. And actually, what we need to do now is we need to shift to a data first market where documents can be created, but off the back of well-structured data that allows neat flows of data around the market. I mean, if you think about pretty much any other market, they are driven by data flows, not by document flows. I think that's absolutely critical and where we're heading. And this is very much about the back end, but about back end to support that, simplify everything to allow to create the foundations for a digital first and data first marketplace.
Okay, that's great. I think that's everything we wanted to cover off on this webinar to give you kind of the foundations about what the initiative's all about and some of the changes that will be coming down the tracks. I think we're all agreed, and certainly from the survey responses, that this phase one has got to happen, and I think that was emphasised clearly by both of you as well as the market as a whole. I think what'll be interesting when we have the discussion and debate on the day will be how phase two manifest itself and in what form and what are the implications for companies. But for now, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Greg. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you at the event.
See you there.
Thank you.